Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge that today we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, in particular the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people. We pay respect to their elders and to the elders of all communities and cultures across Victoria. I'm just going to give you a little brief understanding of both of our authors, although you probably know them well. For a start, Deborah is from Ontario in Canada, and she's best known for her Pavana series, which has been published across the world in 17 languages, with more than $1 million in royalties donated to Street Kids International and to Woman for Woman, an organisation that supports health and education projects in Afghanistan. And Deborah has had some first-hand experience in her travelling and visiting and talking to people in refugee camps around the world. So she writes about children, and she writes about perhaps sometimes the problems, the struggles they have had, whether it's war, whether it's all kinds of difficulties. So we'll be really interested to hear from Deborah. Maurice has written an amazing series, amongst many other books, of course, well over 30 books. You'd probably all know Bumface and the Toad series. Maurice used to be a screenwriter. He lived in England till he was about 16. And then you wrote your first book, 2 Weeks with the Queen. Is that right?
That's
yes?
Right, yeah.
And he's written this beautiful series, Once, Then, Now and After. I have to get that in the right... No, After and Now. That's the right order. And if you've read that series, they're fantastic. They follow the life of Felix. They're written from a child's point of view, and they've certainly captured the imagination of myself, and I'm sure of lots and lots of children, in understanding a very, very difficult time and children grappling with conflict and very difficult situations. But they're also about friendships and relationships and the tests of those friendships. So we look forward to hearing from you both. Thank you.
Do you want me to start?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you. I am so thrilled to be here. I'm from Canada, and we Canadians, we have a lot in common with you good people in Australia. We share a lot of the same heritage, a lot of the same sort of national influences, so I'm very, very happy to be here. We have some differences, and one of the differences concerns the war with Iraq. Now, as I understand it, you had some soldiers serving in the war in Iraq, and we in Canada, didn't really have so many, but we heard a lot about it, of course. And I wanted to look at this war because we have this way of thinking about things as if they just kind of happen, as if they just kind of land on us without any real history to them. And we forget that what happens today is because of decisions that were made yesterday, and therefore what happens tomorrow is because of decisions that we make today. So the war in Iraq was one of those examples of things where history led into the present time, where people are dealing with the aftermath of that long and sad war. So I wanted to learn more about the kids living in that situation. You guys get CNN here, right? News, 24-hour newscast. When the current war in Iraq began, I remember watching TV. You guys, some of you weren't even born yet probably, but your teachers and I, we remember those days. We were watching TV in the lead up to that war and hoping against hope that saner heads would prevail and we would not be dragged into this awful conflagration. But that didn't happen. And when the war began, I remember Wolf Blitzer, or one of those newscasters, standing in front of a big TV screen. And on the screen behind him was the skyline of Baghdad, the capital city of Iraq. And most of the city was in darkness. A lot of the electrical power had been knocked out early in the war by the bombers. But every now and again, the sky would light up with an explosion. Big fireball would rise into the sky, explosions going up into the air. And the newscasters would talk about the kinds of weapons that were being used. They would say, oh, I bet that was a B-52 bomber that dropped that big bomb on that building. Or they'd say, oh, that must have been a cruise missile, the kind of missile that goes around corners and hits its target. Amazing weapon. They got very excited about the kind of technology that was being used. Not a single one of them mentioned the fact that there were people on the ground hoping to live through that night, not being sure at all if they were going to be alive when the sun came up. I met kids in the Iraqi refugee communities in Jordan who had lived through that bombing, saw their neighbor's house explode to one side, neighbor's house explode to the other side, the neighbor's house across the street explode, neighbor's house behind them explode. And when they got up in the morning and walked out their door, they were the only house standing in the neighborhood. We have this way of looking at war in our part of the world, in my part of the world in Canada, as if it were a video game, as if we can press buttons and things happen on a screen, but we never have to get our hair mussed. We can just kind of watch it and then go have a nice dinner. But for people who've lived through it, war has taste and smell and feelings and emotions and all kinds of sensations attached to it. So I wanted to read to you a little bit of an interview I did from this book called Children of War, which is interviews I did with children from the Iraq War living as refugees in Jordan. Now, this is a kid who's 11 years old. Are there any 11-year-olds in the room today? A few of you. Very nice. Well, this kid would fit right into your class. And this is his experience of the war in Iraq. My father was a taxi driver in Baghdad, and my mother was an agricultural engineer. Neither of them have jobs in Jordan now. For a while, my father worked at a small booth in the market selling vegetables, but it became too dangerous. The immigration police would show up at the market looking for Iraqis to send back to Iraq, so we had to stop working there. My mother found a way to do a bit of work from home. She makes things like pickles and baskets and candles, and then she finds a way to sell them. It brings in a bit of money, and that's how we live. Something happened in Baghdad that made my parents decide to leave Iraq. A child at my school was kidnapped. It was during the school day. Lots of people were around. The kidnappers wore dark masks over their heads and faces, so it didn't matter that people could see them. They couldn't tell who they were. They drove up really fast and got out of the car. First, they grabbed a girl and they tried to stuff her into the car, but she screamed so loud and fought them so much that they dropped her and went after a smaller child, a little boy who was too scared to scream or fight. They put him in the car and drove away. They had these guns and no one could stop them. Maybe they would have grabbed me or one of my sisters. They didn't really care which child they grabbed. One was the same as another to them. Even now, here in Jordan, when a car pulls up near me on the street, I worry that men with guns will get out and drag me inside and no one will ever see me again. The kidnappers went to the boy's family and demanded a lot of money for them to let the boy go. My parents were afraid that if any of us were kidnapped, they would not be able to afford to pay the ransom, so they decided we had all better leave Iraq. I don't know what happened to the boy the kidnappers took. Maybe his parents found a way to pay and he's all right. Maybe he's dead. We left Iraq without finding out. The bombing time was terrible. I was young and I didn't understand why the Americans were bombing us. I thought that maybe they didn't know we were down there, so we should tell them so that they could drop their bombs where they wouldn't kill anybody. Those nights were awful. We were stuck in one room with 100 other people in a place where everyone would go to try to be safe from the explosions. We could hear glass breaking and things blowing up. The whole world would shake. I thought we were all going to die, and I didn't want to die in that awful room with all those screaming people around me. We tend to think of our leaders as if they were kind of super people kind of far apart and above us. We have to remember that they are human beings just like us. They make decisions, they make mistakes. The decisions that they make have a real impact on what happens to people all around the world. I think one of our challenges for you, for me, for everybody, is to learn how to make the very best decisions possible so that we don't end up hurting people down the line in the future, in the years to come. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to having a dialogue with you about all of this.
Over to you, Morris.
I'm going to sit down, if that's okay. Am I allowed to do this sitting down? Thank you very much. My ancient legs would appreciate that. I thought I'd just, before we get into a bit of a discussion and hear some of your thoughts, I thought I'd just talk for a few minutes about how I came to write the Felix group of books and why I ended up setting those stories of two young people's friendship in wartime. It was their friendship that I was first attracted to and first thinking about. I didn't actually plan to write at the beginning a story set in wartime, but I did want to explore what friendship can give us, and I wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't let friendship stay just as a cozy, safe, sort of feel-good thing. I really wanted to see if our ability to be friends with each other could be such a powerful and useful part of our lives that no matter what came along, it could stand up to the worst that life could throw at us. And I decided that a way of putting friendship to the test would be to take a friendship between two young people, in my case, a 10-year-old Polish-Jewish boy called Felix and a 6-year-old Polish girl called Zelda, but to place that friendship in the middle of some of the most unfriendly behavior I could come across on a really large scale, and to see how friendly behavior would kind of survive surrounded by really unfriendly behavior. And I didn't have to think too long about which example of really, really unfriendly human behavior I'd use, because I have a distant family connection to that terrible time in the 1930s and 1940s in Europe, World War II, but in particular, that time we call the Holocaust, when the Nazis murdered millions and millions of Jewish people. And that seemed to me to be about as unfriendly a set of human behaviors as I'd ever heard of. And once I realized I was going to be writing about children in wartime, young people in wartime, I found that I was on a journey myself of thinking and discovering that I hadn't really been on before. It struck me right up front that I was going to be writing about some people facing some problems that they did not cause. I don't think there's ever been a child in history who's actually started a war. A history teacher once did make a reference to, I think, hundreds of years ago, there was a king of France who was only about 7. And I think he had a bit of a tantrum one day, and I think they got very nervous in Germany. But I don't think he actually invaded them. So I think I can safely say that a child has never actually started a war. Stories, of course, are about characters grappling with problems, trying to solve them. And of course, when you're writing about young people in war, you know that your characters will not be able to solve their problems in the story, because mostly adults can't solve the problem of war, so young people are going to find it even harder. In those sort of stories, it becomes about surviving the problem, and this was the journey I found myself on with Felix and Zelda. Would they survive was pretty much what they were thinking almost every waking moment. I've been thinking quite a lot over the last couple of years about our dreams, not our curled up in bed dribbling on the pillow type dreams, but our dreams about the future. I think this is a really important and wonderful part of who we are, the fact that we're capable of using our imagination to project forward into the future and to work out possibilities for ourselves, for the people we care about, even for the whole human family on the planet. It relates a bit to what Deborah just said about how many of our decisions, and certainly the decisions of people who have the power to affect others, every decision is going to affect the future in some way. I've just written a book about a boy who's not in wartime, and so he's free, as I hope most of you are, to have dreams of the future which are as open and full of possibilities as his imagination can bring up. And in his case, he's crazy about soccer, so his dreams of the future are about soccer glory and greatness. I was very aware, writing about Felix and Zelda, two young people in wartime, that their dreams were totally the result of the situation they found themselves in. If you fear that you may die at any moment of the day or night and you have no real control over whether that will happen or not, your dreams, your hopes for the future tend to be absolutely the result of that. And if any of you have read any of Felix's stories, you'll know that he's a very creative thinker. He's somebody who does like to think about the future. Sometimes he thinks so far into the future that he's thinking about what might happen in 1962 or 1974, which for him in 1942 is a long way into the future. But I became, the more I knew Felix, the more I became aware, and sometimes sadly aware, that his dreams were so much defined by the terrible situation he found himself in and the fact that he didn't choose to be in that situation. And even when he was thinking about the future of his wonderful friendship with Zelda, it was still limited by the terrible situation he found himself in. And even though the millions of children every day today who find themselves affected by war are also in terrible physical danger, and the people they love are in physical danger, I think it's also a tragedy that any of us should have our dreams limited by finding ourselves in situations that we didn't choose to be in and we don't really have a lot of control over. This is a way of looking at young people in war that, for me, has very much grown out of these stories.
Thank you. Now we're going to have a little bit of a conversation between the two authors, and then we're going to turn it over to you to ask your best questions. Okay. Who would like to start?
Well, this is great because we don't normally get to ask the questions, but I would like to ask Deborah a question, if I may.
Good.
Because I recently read the third Pavana book just a few days ago. I'd read the first two quite some time ago, and so it was a very exciting but moving experience for me to be reunited with her. And when I wrote my first book about my dear character Felix, I thought it was just going to be one book, and I was pretty sure that if I did my job properly, he and I could say goodbye at the end of that process. But long before I finished that first book, I partly because of the hugeness of the problems he was facing, I started to realize that I was probably not going to find it easy to say goodbye to him. And I'm wondering, well, you've written 3 books about Pavana, so I'm sensing that you may have had, did you in fact have a similar?
Yeah, I had no intention of writing a second book in the series. But you're right, I mean, history keeps moving and the characters kept facing new challenges. So that's why I ended up writing like 4 books in the Breadwinner series about those characters. There's no real end point to history, is there? Things never really end. They just sort of change form, and we get a bit more strength and a bit more wisdom to deal with the next challenge that we have to face. But it's never over. It's never over. No,
and I guess because the world of your character is absolutely the world of today and continuing into the future. So that feeling that we authors sometimes have, that it would be nice to be able to wrap things up with a nice concluded story. Once you have a character in the real world like that with an absolutely continuing set of problems, with what I'd say there's probably 12 or 15 books ahead for Pavana, do you think?
Well, Afghan history is big enough. You could make 12 or 15 books out of Afghanistan for sure. There's a lot going on there. Did you, when you were writing your books about World War II, did you reach any conclusions about why we human beings can be such monsters to each other?
I didn't really. What I had to accept after reading about Nazi Germany and the Nazi, the people who kind of organized the whole Nazi war thing, and also reading how millions of people across Europe got caught up, not just as victims, but in some cases as people who participated, who kind of did some bad stuff. And I've always felt uneasy with the notion that among us humans there are either, good people or bad people, saints or monsters. That has never felt right to me, because as soon as you read any story and you are taken inside characters, you realize that none of us are that simple, and certainly none of us are perfect. And I came out of those years of doing that research and writing those books with the sad and sometimes disturbing realization, but I think it's absolutely true, that we are all capable, in certain circumstances, of the very best and the very worst. And that's kind of hard to come to terms with, I think, for all of us, if we look honestly at ourselves and the world. And obviously we're all going to do our very best not to do the worst stuff. But to me, it's one of those truths that stories often illuminate. And yeah, I think it's one of the ways that stories help us, actually, is just in private, just between us and a book and some characters, we can come to understand some sometimes painful things about who and what we are as humans.
In North America right now, there's a great move to be comfortable. We don't like to be uncomfortable. We want to have everything sort of nicely arranged so we never have to feel discomfort or hardship. And I think that's made it difficult for us to stand up for things. And now in Canada, there's a big problem with bullying in schools. Is that a problem here, or have you guys fixed it? You guys deal with bullying in your
still
schools?
broken.
It's still broken. Still a challenge for you guys. So it's a huge problem, because we think of bullying as being something that happens in schools and therefore not all that serious. But of course, a lot of adults do the same kind of behavior. And it's hard when you're the target of bullying, and it's hard when you are witnessing that. It's difficult to figure out where you get your strength to stand up to somebody who is doing that bullying. And when we figure out how we can be uncomfortable and still be okay and still be ourselves, to find the strength to do that is huge, because if we can do that on an individual level, then we can do that on a national level as well. And I think it's all part of that, having to be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes in order to feel like the kind of human beings we're really supposed to be. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a lot of young people in front of us, and a lot of them have read both of your books. And it just occurs to me that that children are so interested in being able to go on your voyages of discovery and your journeys with your characters through really difficult situations. Perhaps they might like to start off with some questions about why they like to read the books, or what they've liked most about what they've read.
There's a question here.
Okay, the question was what was our favourite books of the ones we've written? I'll answer that first, Deborah, because for me, it's a good question, and it's one that's often asked. I tried not to have favourites among my books, because by the time I've finished writing a book, I've formed such a close friendship with the main characters in that book that it feels a little unfair for me to then look back over all the books I've written and say, well, that book and those characters are my favourite, because it's really as difficult as choosing favourites among your closest friends, which I'm sure none of you particularly want to do, except perhaps on your birthday when you see what they've given you. But apart from that, so certain ones of my books have different significance to me. Some of them I had special fun writing, some of them were very exciting or scary, some of them had interesting research. I can say that Felix and Zelda, those characters I've been talking about this morning, because I think I've spent so many years with them as an important part of my life, because they have taken me on journeys that involve bigger feelings than I think any journeys I've been on before. I felt a special kind of relationship with those characters. I still prefer not to use the word favourite, but special.
I write a lot about contemporary difficulties, so there's always a sort of a real feeling of seriousness when I'm writing. I did a historical novel, though, called A Company of Fools, which is published here in Australia, about the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages, and those people are very long gone, so I could just feel like I could have fun with that book, and I enjoyed writing that a lot. A lot of dead bodies and dead rats. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. Yeah, that's all right.
The most, which book?
Oh, which?
Well-written book.
What was our most well-written book? Yeah, well, okay.
Tricky question.
I like to think that I'm getting better.
Yeah.
So the last one, we'll say, or the next one, hopefully even better.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
How do we get inspiration to write our books? Do you wanna go
I get
first?
to travel all around the world and meet amazing people, and I often get inspiration from them and from things that are going on in the world.
Yeah, it's kind of similar for me as well. And also from reading. I get a lot of my first sparks of ideas from things I read. But more, I used to get a lot of my ideas just from daydreaming, but these days I tend to look out into the world a bit more for ideas also, yeah. I guess we should be fair and let some of the people up the back have questions too, and I can see volunteers with microphones who could maybe...
The lass with the stripy top, maybe?
Yep, looking good. Yeah. If you
The
could just go over to the girl
lass
with the
with the stripy top.
Perfect. Stop there. Move
There
to your
she
right.
is.
Perfect.
When
Thank you.
did you decide to be an author? Like, how did you decide?
Oh, how and when did we decide to be authors? Well, my childhood dream, secret, but I'm revealing it now on the condition that you don't tell anybody, okay? My childhood dream was to be a fabulously wealthy and famous soccer star. And I still think I could have done it, except for one tiny little problem I could not overcome, which is that I wasn't very good at soccer. But so when I accepted that, probably at around sort of 8 or 9, I switched to another secret dream, which is that because I've discovered that I really enjoyed writing stories, I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could be a writer. But it didn't really start to happen until I was 17, when I had a short story published and got paid for it for the first time. And that wonderful magazine who gave me my start. I'm so grateful to them. Fine Australian publication, still published actually. Some of you may be able to get your hands on a copy. It's called Dolly Magazine. And thanks to Dolly Magazine, which is one of our finest literary magazines, you understand,
Okay.
that gave me the confidence to think that perhaps I could do it as a job.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. I was always writing and scribbling in notebooks. How many of you guys want to do some writing as part of your professional careers? Probably, how many of you want to do it but don't want to admit that you want to do it? Yeah. There's no magic to it. Just get a notebook and a pen and just start doing it. And you'll be surprised at what comes out of your head.
Okay. Could you bring the microphone down here? There's a few with their hands up just here.
When you have to kill off a character in one of your books, how do you decide which one?
Ah, yes. If we have to kill off a character in one of our books, how do we decide which one?
It has to fit into the story. So there was a girl in Parvana's journey who believed that she could live in a minefield, which of course you can't. It will eventually kill you. And so she ended up having to be killed as part of the story, which did me in. I hated it because she was such a neat kid.
It's a really, really difficult decision, and a very, very hard thing to write when you're killing off particularly a significant character. And I did it one time, and I'll try to quickly talk about this without going into details, but when you write about children in wartime, and you note that a lot of children get killed in wartime, and in particular the Jewish children in World War II were almost all killed. Not quite, but almost. So I didn't feel that I could have my two main characters both survive in a situation where 90-something% of kids like them hadn't survived. That just seemed to be not right and not true and not honouring what had happened to those young people. And so then I had to decide which of my two main characters would not survive, and it was the hardest decision pretty much I've ever made. But it came down to the fact that the one that survived would be around for me to write more stories about. And I made my choice on that basis. It sounds terribly cold-blooded and almost as if I should be, taken away and tried for such a decision. And it was spookily, I have to say, it was spookily like some of the inhuman decisions that were made by the perpetrators in the Holocaust, where as people got off trains at death camps, some people were chosen to live and some people were chosen to die by people who had no right to make that choice and who based it on no sane, rational or fair basis. So it was a very evocative and spooky kind of part of that whole writing process for me.
Now, just one of the young fellows down here with the blue. Sorry. Just come forward a bit, yeah. Our volunteer, thank you.
Where do you get the names of your characters from?
They're all, my books are all authentic to the area, so Afghanistan or Bolivia or wherever, all authentic names.
And do you get your names from people you meet or from people you hear about through people you meet, or?
A combination of different ways, and then you just sort of put a name to your character, and that feels like the right one, right? There's no real scientific way to look at it.
That's right. But
yeah.
as far as having authentic names, because I know I wrote a book about a couple of kids from Afghanistan and their parents trying to come to Australia as refugees, and my research showed me that the great majority of the people doing that in real life, and this is still largely the case, were Hazara people from a particular tribal background in Afghanistan, and I obviously wanted to find names that were authentic Hazara names, and I basically, because I wasn't able to go to Afghanistan, went online and found a website that is, I guess, for people from the Arabic world who want to choose names for their babies, and it just listed hundreds of names, but it gave regional, tribal backgrounds, yeah.
Now there's some questions right up in that corner there.
Well, when you talk about the war, it's kind of confusing for me because I don't know if it's a massive piece of propaganda or if it's a really massive chunk of just really bad decisions made, and I want to know your opinion.
Very interesting question. Yeah.
I think we humans continually put ourselves in a position of having to respond to emergencies rather than thinking in the long term. In Canadian Indigenous communities, there's this saying that we need to think 7 generations ahead so that we make decisions today based on what's going to be best for people 7 generations from ourselves. We don't do that as a society or as a world community. So we're always responding to emergencies. We always end up making short-term, often very bad decisions.
I'm really interested by your question. Can I just ask, were you also, were you wondering whether some of the stuff that we learn about wars through news reporting, through history books, even through works of fiction, were you wondering how true and real those representations are?
Pretty much, I guess.
Okay, yeah, but it's a really interesting and important question, because certainly those of us who write stories set against real wartime have a lot of careful thinking to do and some difficult choices to make in terms of how we represent something in a story that is also happening or has happened in a very real way to real people. It's also worth looking very closely at the way wars are reported on TV, news, in newspapers, online, because often the people who are actually making the war happen have the power to control the way the war is reported. And everybody in a war wants to think and wants everyone else to think that they are the good guys. So often in a war situation, you have news reports coming from both sides of the conflict, both basically saying, we are the good guys. And to a certain extent that might be true, but it's never going to be totally true. So our job as citizens, our job as people who are reading and watching the news, is to try and sort out for ourselves what we think is really going on. And that can be pretty complicated. And you often, it's a good idea to try and find several different reports, several different places where they're actually talking or writing about that war, because you'll probably get some different information and some different views. But it's our responsibility to try and make sense of it all, and it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah. There's a young lady down here who's had her hand up for a long time.
That narrows it down to about 40 people.
Sorry. I'll tell you when you get, go in there. She's got her hand up now.
Excellent.
Oh, it was.
Because you're writing about war, do you find it really hard to continue writing and not be affected by it?
Yes. 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 Yeah. I write about people who've lost everything due to war, and sometimes the stories are pretty horrific. So, you get affected by it for sure.
And the same for me, although my main experience of writing about war was writing about one in the past, so I wasn't able to be as physically present, or I wasn't able to be physically present there at all, in the way that Deborah has actually gone to parts of the world and actually sort of witnessed firsthand the suffering and the results of it. But it's still a very powerfully affecting process, even when you're talking to people who had the experiences 70 years ago, or reading, or watching documentaries. And for me, I don't think I could write about war without including at the heart of the story some of what I think are the very best and most wonderful things that we humans are capable of. And that's really, I couldn't have written about war without entering that world through a friendship.
Sorry, if you come down maybe if you came down a little bit further. Sorry, the volunteer. And there's a teacher actually too. There's a young fellow in front of him as well. A teacher perhaps.
Hi, this question is for Deborah. I read your Parvana series. I taught Parvana, so then a couple of years ago when I was teaching English, so then I read the next two stories. I noticed that, I don't know if it was written as a trilogy or just as which is supposed to end, or it was written as a series. I noticed that the stories became more and more confronting. Parvana is relatively, and if you compare it to Parvana's Journey or Shazia, I don't know how you pronounce it, is relatively tame.
Yes.
Nobody gets killed, no body parts flying, whatever. And then it became more and more confronting and much harder to deal with. Was that a conscious decision?
No, I don't know that it was a conscious decision as much as it was my progression as a writer and my sort of willingness or determination to take it on in a more realistic way. Parvana, the first book, is, you're right, it's even in a brutal situation, people are generally okay by and large. But as her journey progressed in her own story, that couldn't be sustained. So you're right, it gets much more brutal as the books go on. Yeah, that's very true.
And one thing that I don't think I talked about with you, Deborah, is that you're an activist, which means that you've not only written the books, but you've also, royalties have gone to women in Afghanistan, educational programs and health programs as well.
Yeah. This young woman on the edge here has had her hand up from the beginning. Yes.
Do you choose a character and then find background things about it and then base the story on it, or do you find a character and in the story decide everything about it?
Okay. Do you choose a character first and build a background story and then, or does it go the other way around? It varies for me. Sometimes it starts with a situation and then I wait and hear the voice speaking to me in my head, and then I know who the character is and kind of what that journey is going to be. So it varies.
Yeah, same for me. Sometimes there's something out there in the world that I'm interested to explore, and I'll find a character in my imagination that can take me there. But other times I just get a sense in my imagination that a character is there. I may not even hear a voice. I may just have a sense of an emotion. I may not at first know if it's a male or female. I generally assume it's a young person because that's what they have been pretty much for 34 books, but apart from that, I will gradually get to know a character, and sometimes get to know a character quite well before I even start seeing them in any kind of physical form. So yeah, it's either way.
Yeah. Whereabouts now? Do you want to go over here? Could we just go over here in the front row? Yep. Oh, sorry, further along.
Right
One
to
of the
the end there.
boys.
Yeah.
Do boy-girl thing.
Excellent.
There you go.
I've got two questions. One to Morris. Why did you choose to write Bumface?
Why did I choose to write Bumface? I've met quite a few kids over the years who have very, very busy lives. Not only are they busy being kids, but they have a lot of adult responsibility in their lives as well. And I thought I'd like to explore what that might be like through a character. And I called the book Bumface because I believe that no matter what circumstances we're in the world, if we're lucky, we still have our imagination to go into and to do interesting and exciting and fun things. And this boy who is very, very busy, he's looking after his younger brother and sister, his mum and dad are always off doing other things. He doesn't have time to actually physically play with friends, but he spends time in his imagination having some fun there, where he becomes a pirate. And I thought, if you're going to have a pirate in a book, what else would you call a pirate except Bumface?
And my second question is, what's your opinion on the Syrian crisis?
What's my opinion on the Syrian crisis? Well, as we only have 3 seconds of this session left, I would have to say that I always find it's extremely moving when, in a world where it seems that very few people have the power to make decisions that pretty much affect how most people are going to live, I find it extremely exciting and moving when ordinary people start to take some of that power back for themselves. It's a shame when it involves a lot of violence and people being killed, but I think for ordinary people to realize that we all do in fact have the power to join together and help decide the best way to live and the best future for the world, I like that.
I think it also speaks to the question of how do really bad leaders get to be bad leaders? Who arms them? Who funds them? Who supports them? And do our own countries have a hand in that? I know, sadly, that mine does. So it's, again, how do we make decisions? What do we let our leaders get away with? Who do we decide to allow to run countries? It's a longer-term kind of thinking that we have to have.
Mm.
Well, there's many more hands up there. Do we have any extra time or not really?
I don't know.
I think we get our wrists slapped if we
Go
if
over
we
time?
go too much over time. I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just
yeah.
ask one final question of you both?
Yeah. Just before you do, I hate to be
Yep,
rude,
yep, no,
but
that's
there's
right.
a festival organizer up there making dramatic.
Stop.
She's
Okay.
doing this.
Okay.
She's doing this.
Okay,
And
fair
I
enough.
I think she's looking at you. So
All right.
I just, you know.
That's all right.
but-
That's fine. Well, let's put our hands together. And
Thank
give
you, everybody.
Deborah Ellis
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
and Morris.
Beautiful.